Officer Vance Whitaker sat paralyzed at the defense table, his custom suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Across the mahogany divide sat the Honorable Judge Kendrick Hale, radiating the immovable, terrifying gravity of a man who commanded the federal bench. Just months earlier, Whitaker had violently pinned this same man to a rain-slicked Chicago street, casually writing him off as another voiceless thug. Today, the predator was the prey. Whitaker's high-priced defense hinged entirely on mysteriously malfunctioning body cameras and a fabricated police report. He felt utterly untouchable. Then prosecutor Lena Brooks confidently dimmed the room's lights. A digital projector hummed to life, and Whitaker's arrogant smirk instantly vanished. They had tape. The rain was coming down in sheets over Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood, turning the streetlights into blurry halos of amber and white. Judge Kendrick Hale, silver-haired and exhausted from a marathon session of complex civil litigation dockets, was navigating his black Lexus sedan toward home. He drove exactly 2 miles under the speed limit. He always did. Hale was a man who believed deeply in the law. He had spent his entire adult life serving it, first as a public defender, then as a prosecutor, and for the last many years as a federal judge appointed to the Northern District of Illinois. He knew the system intimately, its virtues, its flaws, and its devastating blind spots. Behind him, the sudden blinding flash of blue and red lights shattered the rhythm of the windshield wipers. Hale signaled smoothly and pulled over to the curb under the pale glow of a street lamp. He shifted the car into park, turned on the interior dome light, and placed both hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. It was a practiced routine, a survival mechanism taught to every black man in America, regardless of the degrees on their wall or the robes in their closet. In the rearview mirror, he watched the silhouette of a police officer step out of a patrol cruiser. The officer walked with a heavy, aggressive swagger, his hand resting conspicuously on the butt of his service weapon. This was Officer Vance Whitaker, a veteran of the Chicago Police Department with a jacket full of use-of-force complaints that the Union had miraculously managed to sweep under the rug time and time again. Whitaker tapped his heavy flashlight against Hale's driver's side window. The sound was sharp, demanding. Hale lowered the window halfway. The cold rain blew in, speckling his tailored wool suit. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "License, registration, and proof of insurance." "Now!" Whitaker barked, leaning in close. His breath smelled of stale coffee and nicotine. He did not offer a reason for the stop. He shone the tactical flashlight directly into Hale's eyes, blinding him. "Officer, if you could please lower the light," Hale said, his voice calm, carrying the authoritative baritone that commanded respect in federal courtrooms. "My wallet is in my breast pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. I will reach for them slowly." Whitaker did not lower the light. If anything, he moved it closer. "Did I ask for a speech, pal? I said give me your papers. You people always want to make it complicated." The words hung in the damp air. Hale's jaw tightened, but his expression remained a mask of polite neutrality. Slowly, deliberately, he reached inside his jacket, retrieved his leather wallet, and handed over his Illinois driver's license. Then he reached across to the glove compartment. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Whitaker suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with artificial panic. He stepped back, unholstering his weapon an inch. Hale froze. His hands immediately went back to the steering wheel. "Officer, you asked for my registration. It is in the glove compartment. I am not a threat to you." "Step out of the vehicle," Whitaker commanded. "Step out right now." "Officer, I am legally entitled to know why I was pulled over," Hale said, maintaining his composure. "And I am advising you that I am unarmed and simply returning home from work." "I said get out of the car." Whitaker ripped the driver's side door open. Before Hale could unbuckle his seatbelt, Whitaker lunged forward. He grabbed the shoulder of Hale's suit jacket, violently yanking the older man from the vehicle. Hale stumbled into the street, his knees hitting the cold, wet asphalt. The shock of the impact jolted up his spine. "What are you doing? I'm not resisting." "Stop resisting, stop reaching," Whitaker yelled, performing for an audience of none. His partner, a rookie named Riley Beck, was just getting out of the cruiser, hanging back, looking uncertain. Whitaker shoved Hale face first onto the hood of the Lexus. The hot metal burned against Hale's cheek through the rain. Whitaker wrenched Hale's arms behind his back, twisting his left shoulder with enough force to tear the rotator cuff. A sharp, blinding pain shot down Hale's arm, causing him to cry out. "Shut up!" Whitaker hissed in his ear. He drove his elbow hard into the small of Hale's back, clicking the steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. They were ratcheted down so tight they instantly cut off circulation. "Think you can cop an attitude with me in my city? You're just another street thug in a nice suit. Probably stole the car." "My name is Kendrick Hale," the judge breathed through the pain, rain mixing with a trickle of blood where his face had scraped the hood. "You are making a profound mistake." "The only mistake was you opening your mouth," Whitaker sneered. He yanked Hale up by the chain of the handcuffs, ignoring the gasp of agony from the older man, and marched him toward the back of the cruiser. Through it all, Hale made a conscious tactical decision. He did not say he was a federal judge. Out here on the dark, rain-slick street, titles did not stop bullets. Out here, Whitaker was the judge, jury, and executioner. Hale knew he needed to survive the night to fight the battle where he held the advantage. In the daylight, under the letter of the law. The harsh fluorescent lights of the CPD 2nd District Precinct buzzed like angry hornets. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool, cheap floor wax, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Officer Whitaker pushed Judge Hale through the double doors, frog-marching him toward the booking desk. Hale's suit was ruined, soaked through and smeared with grease and dirt from the hood of his car. His left eye was swelling, and blood had dried in a dark trail down his jaw. His hands, still cuffed behind his back, were numb. Despite his condition, Hale walked with his head held high, observing everything: the layout, the personnel, the time on the wall clock. He was gathering evidence. Sergeant Crow, a heavy-set desk sergeant with a graying mustache, looked up from his computer monitor. "What do we got, Whitaker?" "Traffic violation turned into a 148, Whitaker said loudly, puffing out his chest. "Section 148, resisting arrest. Suspect became combative, refused lawful orders, reached for his waistband, had to use subduing force." Crow looked at Hale. He saw an older black man bleeding, but standing with a posture that did not match the typical drunks or brawlers brought in on a weeknight. "He need a bus?" Crow asked, nodding toward Hale's face, asking if he needed an ambulance. "He's fine. Just a scrape." "Slippery out there," Whitaker said dismissively. "Empty your pockets, pal." Whitaker removed the cuffs, roughly shoving Hale forward. Hale suppressed a wince as the feeling began to painfully return to his fingers. Slowly, he emptied his pockets onto the steel counter. Keys, a Mont Blanc pen, his wallet, and his cell phone. Whitaker snatched the wallet to begin processing the ID. "Kendrick Hale," Whitaker read slowly, mocking the formal name. "Well, Kendrick, you're going to be spending a few days with us." "I have the right to a phone call," Hale said, his voice steady, "and I request medical attention for my shoulder." "You get a call when I say you get a call," Whitaker snapped. He turned his back to fill out the arrest report, typing aggressively on the precinct keyboard. Whitaker was crafting a masterpiece of police fiction. He wrote that Hale was driving erratically, smelling of alcohol, a blatant lie, and that when confronted, Hale had aggressively lunged at him, forcing Whitaker to perform a dynamic takedown for his own safety. As he typed, he casually reached up and tapped his body camera. It was off. He had turned it off the moment he stepped out of his cruiser. His partner, Riley, had conveniently forgotten to turn his on at all. "Hey, Sarge," Hale spoke up, bypassing the arrogant patrolman. "According to department policy, holding a suspect without access to legal counsel after processing begins is a violation of my Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. I want my phone call now." Sergeant Crow paused. The phrasing was not the usual "I know my rights" bluster. It was precise, clinical. Crow frowned, glancing at Whitaker, then back to Hale. "Give him the phone, Whitaker. Let's not make a meal out of this." Whitaker rolled his eyes, grabbed the precinct's corded desk phone, and shoved it across the counter. "Make it quick, Kendrick." Hale dialed a number from memory. It was not a defense attorney. It was not his wife, whom he did not want to terrify. In the middle of the night, he called Chief Judge Ronan Vale of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Sterling? Ronan? It's Kendrick." "Kendrick? Good God. Do you know what time it is? Are we still at the courthouse?" "No, Ronan. I am at the 2nd District Police Precinct. I have been assaulted and arrested by a patrol officer under false pretenses. I need you to make a call." There was a 5-second silence on the line. The sleep completely vanished from Chief Judge Vale's voice. "Are you injured?" "Torn rotator cuff, facial lacerations, handcuff neuropathy." "Who is the arresting officer?" Hale looked directly at Whitaker's badge. "Officer Vance Whitaker, badge number 44892. "Give me 10 minutes, Kendrick." The line went dead. Hale placed the receiver back on the cradle. He stood quietly, ignoring Whitaker's smug smirks. Exactly minutes later, the double doors of the precinct flew open. It was not a lawyer. It was Captain O'Reilly, the precinct commander, still buttoning his uniform shirt over his undershirt, looking panicked. He stormed past the holding cells and went straight to the booking desk. "Where is he?" O'Reilly demanded, breathing hard. "Where is who, Cap?" Sergeant Crow asked, confused. O'Reilly's eyes locked onto Hale. The color drained from the captain's face. He knew who Kendrick Hale was. He had testified in his courtroom years ago. "Jesus Christ," O'Reilly muttered. He rushed forward. "Judge Hale, sir, I don't know what to say." At the word judge, the precinct went dead silent. The clicking of keyboards stopped. The distant chatter faded. Officer Whitaker froze, his hands hovering over his keyboard. The smug smile slid off his face, replaced by a pale, sickening realization. He looked at the bloody, bruised man standing at the counter. "Judge," Whitaker whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Captain O'Reilly," Hale said smoothly, as if they were meeting at a gala rather than a booking desk. "Your officer here pulled me over without cause, dragged me from my vehicle, assaulted me, and has spent the last minutes falsifying an arrest report. I want my property, and I want a photographer down here immediately to document my injuries before I am transported to Northwestern Memorial." O'Reilly turned to Whitaker, his eyes blazing with a fury that could melt steel. "Whitaker, tell me your body camera was on." Whitaker swallowed hard. The blue wall of silence was strong, but he was not stupid. He knew he was standing on a trap door, but he could not back down now. Admitting fault meant prison. He had to double down. "Cap, the camera malfunctioned," Whitaker lied, his voice trembling slightly, but he was resisting. He was reaching for something. He didn't tell me who he was. It was a righteous stop. Hale looked at Whitaker, a cold, unyielding gaze that had broken mafia hitmen and corrupt politicians alike. "The truth, Officer Whitaker, has a funny way of making itself known. We will see how righteous your stop was in the light of day." O'Reilly immediately took Hale to his private office, suspending Whitaker on the spot pending an internal affairs investigation. But Whitaker, backed by the aggressive police union, was not going to go quietly. The union released a statement the next morning claiming the judge used his position to intimidate a working-class cop who was just doing his job, leaning heavily on the fact that without video evidence, it was a he-said-he-said situation. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought Hale was just another victim they could discredit. They were wrong. Months later, in the Dirksen Federal Building, the civil rights trial of the United States versus Vance Whitaker was the highest-profile case in Chicago. The federal government, led by sharp, unrelenting prosecutor Lena Brooks, had brought charges of deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice against the former officer. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens hovering over notepads. Whitaker sat beside his high-priced, union-appointed defense attorney, Victor Lang. Lang was a shark famous for getting cops off the hook by putting the victims on trial. He wore a custom pinstripe suit and possessed an arrogant charm that played well with juries. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Lang said during his opening statement, pacing in front of the box, "what we have here is a classic case of ego. A powerful man, a federal judge accustomed to everyone bowing to his every whim, gets pulled over. He feels disrespected. He refuses to comply with a simple routine traffic stop. Officer Whitaker, tasked with keeping our dangerous streets safe, did not know he was dealing with royalty. He only saw a non-compliant suspect. The injuries sustained by Mr. Hale, while unfortunate, were the direct result of his own resistance. The prosecution will cry racism. They will cry brutality. But what they will not give you is proof, because the only proof is the word of an angry, entitled man against a decorated police officer. Prosecutor Lena Brooks, seated at the government's table, did not object. She just took notes, her face impassive. When it was her turn to call her first witness, she stood. "The government calls the Honorable Judge Kendrick Hale to the stand." A murmur ran through the courtroom as Hale walked through the wooden gates. He wore a dark navy suit, moving slightly stiffly, a lingering effect of the surgery required to repair the torn rotator cuff Whitaker had given him. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and took his seat. Brooks walked to the podium. "Judge Hale, can you walk us through the events of that night?" For the next hour, Hale laid out the facts with surgical precision. He did not use emotional language. He did not exaggerate. He described the speed he was driving, the location of the stop, the blinding light, the unprovoked escalation, and the physical assault. His calm, authoritative demeanor was devastating to the defense's narrative of an angry, out-of-control driver. Lang knew he was losing the jury. When it was time for cross-examination, he attacked aggressively. "Judge Hale," Lang started, leaning on the podium, "you claim you were perfectly compliant, yet you admit you questioned the officer's authority to pull you over." "I asked for the reason for the stop, Mr. Lang." "As is the right of every American citizen under the Fourth Amendment," Hale replied calmly. "And when you reached into your jacket in the dark during a traffic stop, you did not think that might alarm an officer who works in one of the most dangerous districts in the country?" "I told him exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. I moved slowly. His alarm was manufactured to justify his subsequent violence." Lang scoffed. "Manufactured? That's a strong word." "But it's just your word, isn't it, Judge? You want this jury to send a man to federal prison because you say he hit you. But isn't it true that your car has tinted windows? Isn't it true that you refused to step out of the vehicle immediately?" "I was physically dragged from the vehicle while wearing my seatbelt, Mr. Lang." "So you say," Lang countered, turning to the jury with a theatrical shrug. "Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, technology fails." Officer Whitaker's body camera malfunctioned. Officer Beck forgot to engage his. So we are left with a powerful judge trying to ruin a cop's life because his pride was bruised along with his shoulder. Lang turned back to Hale, smiling a greasy, victorious smile. "I have no further questions for this witness." Whitaker, sitting at the defense table, allowed himself a small smirk. He felt untouchable. The union had assured him, no video, no conviction. A jury would not convict a cop based solely on testimony, even a judge's, if the defense could plant a reasonable doubt that the judge was acting entitled. Lena Brooks stood up for redirect. Just a few more questions, Your Honor. Brooks walked toward the jury box holding a small manila folder. The air in the courtroom seemed to thin out. Mr. Lang has made a great deal about the lack of video evidence in this case, Brooks said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. He is correct that the Chicago Police Department cameras mysteriously failed that night. However, Judge Hale, where exactly on 55th Street were you pulled over? Hale adjusted his glasses. Directly in front of a commercial property, 1442 East 55th Street. And do you know what business occupies that address, Judge? Yes, it is a branch of the First National Bank of Chicago. Whitaker's smirk vanished. His stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. He grabbed Lang's arm, his fingers digging into the expensive pinstripe fabric. Lang frowned, trying to shake the officer off. Brooks turned to the presiding judge. Your Honor, the government would like to enter into evidence Exhibit 42. It is a digitally enhanced, time-stamped, high-definition security recording subpoenaed directly from the exterior ATM cameras of the First National Bank, which had a completely unobstructed, illuminated view of the street, the sidewalk, and the hood of Judge Hale's car. Chaos erupted at the defense table. Lang sprang to his feet, his face red. Objection, Your Honor. The defense was not provided with this specific file in discovery. That is inaccurate, Your Honor, Brooks fired back without missing a beat. It was included in the supplemental digital discovery file labeled Commercial Surveillance, handed over months ago. If Mr. Lang failed to review the external banking footage, assuming there was nothing there, that is a failure of defense counsel, not a discovery violation. The presiding judge looked over his glasses at the defense attorney. Overruled, Mr. Lang. The prosecution may play the tape. Brooks pressed a button on a remote. The large monitors in the courtroom flickered to life. There it was, crystal clear and high definition, illuminated by the bank's bright security floodlights and the flashing red and blue of the cruiser. The silent video showed the black Lexus pulling over smoothly. It showed Officer Whitaker storming the car. It showed Hale, hands clearly raised, making no sudden movements. And then it showed the violence. The courtroom gasped collectively as the footage showed Whitaker violently ripping the older man from the car, slamming him face first onto the hood, and viciously driving his knee into Hale's spine, while the judge's hands were already secured behind his back. Brooks paused the video right on Whitaker's face, bathed in the streetlights, his expression contorted with rage as he assaulted a defenseless man. Brooks looked at the frozen image, then at Whitaker, and finally at Judge Hale. Judge, is the man assaulting you in this video the same man sitting at the defense table today? Officer Kendrick Hale looked directly at Vance Whitaker. The cop was pale, sweating profusely, staring at the screen as if watching his own execution. Yes, Hale said, his voice ringing with the finality of a gavel strike. That is him. The silence in courtroom 14 was absolute, save for the hum of the projector and the shallow, panicked breathing of Officer Vance Whitaker. The video loop played again. The violent yank, the brutal slam against the hood, the knee dropping with sickening force into the spine of a compliant 62-year-old federal judge. Defense attorney Victor Lang was practically vibrating with poorly concealed rage. He shuffled his papers, leaning over to aggressively whisper into his client's ear. Whitaker just stared at the screen, his face the color of wet ash. Prosecutor Lena Brooks did not gloat. She simply let the footage do the heavy lifting. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor, she said quietly, returning to her seat. Judge Kendrick Hale stepped down from the witness stand with the same measured, dignified pace he had maintained throughout the ordeal. He did not look at Whitaker. He did not need to. The predator had become the prey. "The government calls Officer Riley Beck," Brooks announced. The courtroom doors opened, and Beck walked down the center aisle. He was young, a rookie who had been on the street for less than a year. He looked like a boy wearing his father's uniform. As he passed the defense table, he refused to make eye contact with Whitaker, keeping his gaze fixed firmly on the judge's bench. Beck took the oath, his voice cracking slightly on the words, "So help me God." "Officer Beck," Brooks began, resting her hands on the podium, "you were Officer Whitaker's partner on that night, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you filed a supplemental report corroborating Officer Whitaker's version of events. You wrote that Kendrick Hale was physically aggressive, refused verbal commands, and necessitated a dynamic takedown." Brooks picked up a piece of paper. "Is that your signature at the bottom of this report?" Beck swallowed hard. He looked at the paper projected on the secondary monitor, then down at his hands. "Yes, ma'am, that's my signature." "Officer Beck, you just watched Exhibit 42, the security footage from the First National Bank. Does that footage accurately reflect the events of that night?" Lang leaped up. "Objection. Calls for a conclusion. The witness is not qualified to make—" "Overruled," the presiding judge barked. "He was there, Mr. Lang. He can testify to what he saw. Answer the question, officer." Beck gripped the edges of the witness box. He looked at Whitaker. Whitaker shot him a look of pure, concentrated venom, a silent threat promising that if Beck flipped, his career in Chicago was over. The Fraternal Order of Police would ruin him. He would be a rat. But Beck also looked at Lena Brooks, and he remembered the proffer session he had attended in secret days earlier, sitting in a windowless room with two FBI agents who explained exactly what the federal penalty for perjury and conspiracy to deprive civil rights entailed. The video is accurate," Beck whispered. "Please speak into the microphone, officer," Brooks said. "The video is accurate," Beck repeated louder this time. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. "So your official police report was a lie?" Brooks pressed. "Yes." "Why did you lie, Officer Beck?" Tears welled in the young cop's eyes. "Because Whitaker told me to. When we were at the precinct after we found out who he was, Whitaker pulled me into the locker room. He said we had to get our story straight. He said if we did not write it up as a combative suspect, internal affairs would string us up. He told me the cameras were off, so it was just our word against his." Brooks stepped out from behind the podium, moving closer to the jury box. "Let's talk about those cameras, Officer Beck. It is CPD policy to activate body-worn cameras during every traffic stop. Why was yours off?" Beck wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Whitaker told me to leave it off." Lang was on his feet again. "Objection. Hearsay." "It goes to state of mind and conspiracy, Your Honor," Brooks countered smoothly. "Overruled. Proceed." "Tell us exactly what Officer Whitaker said to you before he exited the cruiser, Officer Beck." The courtroom held its breath. The blue wall of silence, an institution older than the Chicago skyline itself, was cracking wide open on federal record. "We were running plates," Beck testified, his voice shaking. "Whitaker saw the Lexus. He said, look at this guy driving a $70,000 car in this neighborhood, probably pushing weight. I told him the plates came back clean, but Whitaker just laughed. He reached up, tapped his camera, and said, 'Keep yours dark, rookie. I'm going to teach this guy a lesson about whose streets these are.' Pandemonium. Reporters scrambled in the pews. The presiding judge hammered his gavel, demanding order, threatening to clear the gallery. At the defense table, Whitaker slumped in his chair, his head dropping into his hands. His own partner had just driven the final nail into his coffin. It was not just assault anymore. It was premeditated. It was a civil rights violation with malice aforethought. When it was Lang's turn to cross-examine, he tried to salvage the wreckage. He attacked Beck's character, accusing him of making a sweetheart deal with the federal prosecutors to save his own skin, painting him as a coward who would throw a decorated veteran under the bus. But the damage was done. The jury had seen the video. They had heard the rookie's tearful confession. The narrative of the brave cop facing down a dangerous street thug was dead and buried. The defense's case was in shambles. Lang asked for a recess, practically dragging Whitaker into a private consultation room down the hall. Minutes later, court resumed. Lang stood, buttoning his jacket, trying to project a confidence he absolutely did not feel. "Your Honor, the defense calls Vance Whitaker to the stand." A murmur of genuine shock swept through the room. It was the golden rule of criminal defense. Never put the accused on the stand unless absolutely desperate. Brooks raised an eyebrow at the prosecution table, a slight predatory smile touching the corners of her mouth. Whitaker was going to testify. He was going to try to talk his way out of it. It was an act of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Whitaker took the stand. He wore a crisp gray suit, his hair neatly parted. Under Lang's gentle questioning, he tried to play the victim. He spoke of the stress of the job, the dangers of the South Side, the split-second decisions required to stay alive. "When you approached the vehicle," Lang asked soothingly, "what was going through your mind?" "I was terrified," Whitaker lied, his voice adopting a practiced solemnity. "It was dark, raining. The driver's windows were tinted. When he reached into his jacket, I did not know if he was grabbing a wallet or a Glock. I have a wife and 2 daughters, Mr. Lang. I just wanted to go home to them. I used the force I believed was necessary to secure the scene." "And the comments Officer Beck claimed you made about teaching him a lesson?" "A complete fabrication," Whitaker said smoothly. "The kid panicked when internal affairs got involved. He is trying to save his own job by sacrificing mine." Lang nodded solemnly. "Thank you, officer. No further questions." Lena Brooks stood up. She did not carry any files. She did not carry a notepad. She simply walked to the center of the floor and looked at Whitaker for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Officer Whitaker," Brooks started, her voice dangerously quiet. "You testified you were terrified." "Yes, ma'am." "Terrified for your life. Terrified you might not see your wife and daughters again." "That is correct." "Because Judge Hale, a 62-year-old man driving 2 miles under the speed limit, slowly reached for his wallet after you explicitly demanded his identification." "I could not see what he was reaching for." "We all saw the video, Mr. Whitaker," Brooks snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "We saw a man sitting perfectly still, calmly explaining his actions. We saw you drag him out by the collar. You claim you were terrified. I submit to you that you were angry." "I was relying on my training." "You were relying on your badge to act as a shield for your own prejudices," Brooks interrupted. "You saw a black man in a nice car, and you decided he did not deserve your respect. You did not know he was a judge. You thought he was a nobody. You thought you could brutalize him, file a fake report, and go grab a beer with your buddies." "Objection! Badgering!" Lang yelled. "Sustained! Miss Brooks, reel it in," the judge warned. "Apologies, Your Honor." Brooks took a breath. "Mr. Whitaker, you claim Officer Beck is lying about your intent to teach a lesson. You claim you never made those statements." "I never said that," Whitaker replied, his confidence returning slightly. "It was his word against the rookie's. After you arrested Judge Hale, but before you realized he was a federal judge, you placed him in a holding cell at the 2nd District Precinct, correct?" "Yes." "And then you went to the break room to get a cup of coffee, while Sergeant Crow processed the paperwork." Whitaker frowned, sensing a trap. "I believe so." Brooks walked back to her table and picked up a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, the government introduces Exhibit 58. This is a transcript of data legally extracted from the defendant's personal cell phone via a federal search warrant. Lang jumped up, but Brooks cut him off before he could speak. This was logged into discovery months ago, Your Honor. The defense has had ample time to review it. The judge nodded. Proceed, Miss Brooks. Mr. Whitaker, Brooks said, holding the paper up. Are you a member of a group text chat titled 2nd District Savages? Whitaker's face went completely bloodless. The arrogant facade shattered into a million pieces. I don't recall the specific name. Let me refresh your memory. Brooks walked to the center of the floor and looked at Whitaker for a long, uncomfortable moment. It includes yourself, Officer Kevin O'Shea, and Sergeant Dennis Rohr. On the night of the incident, at exactly the moment while Kendrick Hale was bleeding in your holding cell, right before Captain O'Reilly walked in and informed you of his identity, you sent a text message to this group. Would you like to read it to the court, or shall I? Whitaker sat frozen. His throat worked convulsively, but no sound came out. Let the record reflect the witness is refusing to answer, Brooks said coldly. I will read it. At that exact time you texted, and I quote, just bagged a live one on 55th. Some arrogant suit in a Lexus. Thought he could give me lip. Put him on the hood and tuned him up a bit. Should see the look on his face. Body cam was off. LOL. The courtroom erupted. Several jurors gasped audibly. One woman in the front row actually covered her mouth in horror. The presiding judge struck his gavel repeatedly, the sharp cracks cutting through the mounting chaos. Brooks did not yell. She did not need to. She stepped right up to the witness box, invading Whitaker's space. You were not terrified, Vance Whitaker. You were bragging. You assaulted a citizen, falsified a federal document, intimidated a subordinate officer, and laughed about it in a text message. And the only thing you regret is that the man you chose to assault happened to be a federal judge who had the power to fight back. Whitaker looked frantically at Lang, but the high-priced union lawyer was staring at the table, completely motionless. Lang knew it was over. There was no spinning this. There was no Graham versus. Counter defense for a text message with an LOL after a beating. It was just locker room talk, Whitaker stammered pathetically, his voice trembling. It was a joke. A joke, Brooks repeated, turning her back on him in utter disgust. She looked directly at the jury. Tell that to Judge Hale's torn rotator cuff. No further questions, Your Honor. Closing arguments began days later. The Chicago autumn had turned bitter and gray, mimicking the mood inside the Dirksen Federal Building. The gallery was standing room only. The Fraternal Order of Police had packed the back rows with off-duty officers in plain clothes, a silent show of intimidation that completely failed to unnerve prosecutor Lena Brooks. Defense attorney Victor Lang spoke first, his voice lacking the booming confidence he possessed on day one. He pleaded with the jury to consider the impossibility of policing in Chicago. He begged them not to ruin a veteran's life over seconds of misjudged adrenaline and a tasteless, out-of-context text message. It was a weak, meandering argument, a desperate attempt to grasp at the vanishing threads of reasonable doubt. When Lena Brooks took the floor, she did not pace. She stood directly in front of the jury box, her eyes locking with each of the 12 citizens tasked with deciding Vance Whitaker's fate. Power, Brooks said softly, the word echoing in the absolute silence of the courtroom. We give our police officers extraordinary power, the power to detain, the power to use force, the power, in certain tragic circumstances, to take a life. In exchange for that power, we demand one thing: accountability to the law. Vance Whitaker believed that the law was something he enforced upon others, not something he was bound by himself. She pointed a finger at the defense table. Whitaker could not look at her. His eyes were glued to the mahogany table. "He did not make a split-second mistake in a dark alley," Brooks continued, her voice rising in intensity. "He made a deliberate, calculated choice to brutalize Kendrick Hale because he felt entitled to do so. He turned off his camera. He ordered his rookie partner to do the same. He fabricated a police report to justify his violence. And then he mocked his victim to his colleagues. What you saw on that bank security footage was not law enforcement. It was an assault under the color of law. It was a betrayal of the badge. If you acquit him, you are telling every corrupt officer in this city that as long as the cameras are off, they can do whatever they want to, whomever they want." Brooks paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the jury. "Find him guilty. Not because the victim was a federal judge, but because the victim was a citizen of the United States and his rights were trampled in the mud by a man sworn to protect them." The jury deliberated for exactly hours and minutes. It was a spectacularly short deliberation for a federal civil rights trial. When the foreperson, a middle-aged schoolteacher from Evanston, stood up, the tension in the room was suffocating. Whitaker stood beside Lang, his hands visibly shaking. "On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law, how do you find?" the clerk read. "We find the defendant guilty," the foreperson said. "On the count of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the count of witness tampering and intimidation, guilty." A loud collective exhale swept through the courtroom. In the back rows, the off-duty officers stood up in silence and began filtering out the double doors. They were not staying to support Whitaker. They were abandoning ship. The blue wall had fallen, and they did not want to be caught in the rubble. But the drama was not over. As Judge Robert Harrison prepared to remand Whitaker into federal custody pending sentencing, Lena Brooks requested to approach the bench. "Your Honor," Brooks said, ensuring her microphone was hot so the entire room could hear, "the government officially requests the defendant be denied bail. Furthermore, I am informing this court that based on the evidence extracted from Mr. Whitaker's mobile device, specifically the 2nd District Savages text thread, a federal grand jury convened this morning has officially returned indictments for Sergeant Dennis Rohr and Officer Kevin O'Shea for conspiracy to deprive civil rights and systemic obstruction of justice." Whitaker's head snapped up, his mouth fell open. He looked at Brooks in sheer, unadulterated horror. He had not just sunk his own ship. By trying to cover his tracks and bringing his phone into the evidentiary record, he had handed the Department of Justice the keys to the entire corrupt kingdom at the 2nd District. He had taken his friends down with him. "Bail is denied," Judge Harrison declared, banging his gavel. "The defendant is remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals." 2 heavy-set U.S. Marshals stepped up behind Whitaker. "Hands behind your back," one of them ordered. Whitaker felt the cold, unforgiving bite of steel around his wrists. He was spun around, facing the gallery. And there, sitting in the 2nd row, was Judge Kendrick Hale. The judge was not smiling. He was not gloating. He simply watched with the solemn, immovable gravity of the justice system at work. Whitaker was marched out the side door, his arrogant swagger replaced by the shuffling, defeated walk of a convicted felon. Sentencing day arrived months later, plunging Chicago into the bitter, unforgiving depths of winter. The wind howling off Lake Michigan rattled the thick reinforced glass of the Dirksen Federal Building. But inside Courtroom 14, the atmosphere was suffocatingly still. Vance Whitaker was escorted through the side doors by 2 heavily armed United States Marshals. The transformation was jarring. The arrogant, broad-shouldered officer who had swaggered through the initial hearings was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out man wearing an oversized bright orange jumpsuit stamped with the letters MCC, Metropolitan Correctional Center. His sharply styled hair was now unkempt and thinning. His skin carried the sickly fluorescent pallor of a man who had not seen natural sunlight in months. and his eyes darted nervously around the room. The cuffs around his wrists and the chains linking his ankles rattled with every shuffling step he took toward the defense table. The gallery, once packed with off-duty officers forming an intimidating blue wall of solidarity, was entirely devoid of police presence. The Fraternal Order of Police had completely abandoned him the moment the 2nd District Savage's text messages were read into the federal record. Now the wooden pews were filled with civil rights watchdogs, local journalists, and citizens who wanted to see if the justice system would actually hold one of its own accountable. Defense attorney Victor Lang stood up to make his final plea for leniency, but his heart clearly was not in it. Lang was a man used to winning, and the catastrophic collapse of this case had severely damaged his reputation. "Your Honor," Lang began, his voice lacking its usual theatrical boom, "we ask the court to consider Mr. Whitaker's years of service to the city of Chicago. He was a decorated officer who put his life on the line daily in some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in this country. He has already lost his career, his standing in the community, and his reputation. We ask for a downward departure from the sentencing guidelines. Ruining the rest of his life for one terrible lapse in judgment serves no rehabilitative purpose." Prosecutor Lena Brooks did not even bother to stand from her chair to object. She simply let the weak argument hang in the cold air, completely unsupported by the devastating mountain of evidence they had presented. Judge Robert Harrison looked down from the bench, his expression completely unreadable. "Does the victim wish to address the court before I hand down the sentence?" "I do, Your Honor." A deep, commanding baritone echoed from the first row. The Honorable Judge Kendrick Hale stood up. He was dressed in a pristine tailored charcoal suit, his posture perfectly straight, betraying absolutely none of the physical trauma he had endured on the hood of his Lexus months earlier. He walked to the podium with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who owned the room. When he reached the microphone, he did not look at the judge. He turned his head and looked directly at Vance Whitaker. Whitaker tried to maintain eye contact, trying to summon a fraction of the false bravado he had wielded on 55th Street, but he could not. Under the weight of Hale's unflinching gaze, Whitaker's eyes dropped to the scarred mahogany of the defense table. "For decades I have served the law," Hale began, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. "I have dedicated my entire professional life to the belief that the American justice system, for all its flaws and historical blind spots, is the only barrier standing between civilization and absolute chaos. I have handed down sentences that took away men's freedom, and I have dismissed charges when the state overreached. I believed in the badge. I believed in the social contract." Hale gripped the edges of the podium. "But on that rainy night, Mr. Whitaker violently reminded me of the terrifying darkness that exists when authority operates without accountability. When I was pulled from my vehicle, I did not announce my title. I did not demand special treatment as a federal judge. I responded as an everyday citizen of this country. And what I experienced was the unbridled terror of a man who realized that the law could not protect him from the very people sworn to uphold it." A pin drop could have been heard in the gallery. Brooks watched Hale with profound respect. "Mr. Whitaker did not make a mistake," Hale continued, his tone hardening into cold steel. "A mistake is misreading a license plate. A mistake is taking a wrong turn, beating a compliant, unarmed man, turning off a recording device to hide the evidence, coercing a subordinate into participating in a conspiracy, and then laughing about the assault in a text message is not a mistake. It is a terrifying manifestation of absolute arrogance. If Mr. Whitaker had stopped a 19-year-old college student that night, or a hard-working father heading home from a late shift, that man would likely be sitting where Mr. Whitaker is sitting right now, convicted on the basis of a fabricated police report." Hale turned to face Judge Harrison. I do not stand here today to ask for vengeance, Your Honor. I ask for the absolute, unyielding standard of the law to be applied. Mr. Whitaker weaponized his badge. He made a mockery of the thousands of honorable police officers who do their jobs with integrity. I ask that the court send a definitive message that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law they are sworn to enforce. Hale stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat, leaving a heavy, profound silence in his wake. Judge Robert Harrison folded his hands on the bench. He looked down at Whitaker, his eyes narrowed with a sharp paternal disgust. "Mr. Whitaker, please stand." Whitaker rose, his legs trembling so violently that the chains around his ankles clinked against the wooden chair. "I have reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, the letters submitted by your family, and the staggering weight of the evidence presented at trial," Judge Harrison said, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Your attorney asks me to consider your years of service. I have considered them, and I find it entirely plausible, based on your actions and your digital communications, that Kendrick Hale was simply the first victim who possessed the power and the unassailable credibility to stop you." Whitaker swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat tracing its way down his temple. "You abused your authority. You perjured yourself before a federal jury. And you fundamentally betrayed the public trust," Harrison declared, picking up a document. "Therefore, on the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, I sentence you to 96 months in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons. On the charge of obstruction of justice, I sentence you to an additional 24 months to be served consecutively, a total of 120 months, 10 years. This sentence will be served without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, as a consequence of this federal felony conviction, your municipal pension is entirely forfeited, and you are permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement or security capacity for the rest of your natural life." Whitaker's knees buckled. Lang had to grab his arm to keep him from collapsing onto the floor. 10 years, no pension. His entire life's work, his financial security, and his freedom entirely vaporized because of his own uncontrollable hubris. "Court is adjourned," Harrison said, striking the gavel with a definitive crack. The real-life karma hit Vance Whitaker the moment he stepped off the Bureau of Prisons transport bus at the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was immediately stripped of his remaining dignity. He handed over his clothes, was sprayed down with harsh chemical delousing soap, and was issued his new identity: Inmate Number 8, 492-024. The brutal reality of the federal prison system for a former cop was a nightmare Whitaker had never truly comprehended until the heavy steel doors slammed shut behind him. Because of his background in law enforcement, the Bureau of Prisons deemed him an extreme target. He could not be placed in the general population. The risk of him being murdered in the yard or the cafeteria by the very men he and his colleagues had put away was a statistical certainty. Instead, Whitaker was placed in the Special Housing Unit, the SHU. Protective custody was just a polite bureaucratic term for solitary confinement. He was locked in a windowless concrete cell measuring 6 by 9 feet for 23 hours a day. His meals were slid through a narrow slot in the steel door. He had no human contact save for the indifferent guards who patrolled the block. And those guards did not look at him with the brotherhood of the badge. To them, he was a liability, a dirty cop who had brought the wrath of the FBI down on a precinct, a man who made their jobs exponentially harder by eroding public trust. In the crushing, suffocating silence of his cell, Whitaker had nothing but time. Every night, as the harsh fluorescent lights flickered out, leaving him in absolute darkness, his mind would ruthlessly replay the tape. He remembered the feeling of Hale's expensive suit under his hands. He remembered the sickening crunch of the judge's shoulder against the wet hood of the Lexus. And he remembered typing those 3 letters: LL. He was now living the exact lie he had tried to sell to the jury. He was entirely powerless. He was completely at the mercy of a system that did not care about him. Every sudden noise from the cell block, every shout echoing through the ventilation grates, sent spikes of pure, unadulterated terror through his chest. Hard karma had not just taken his freedom, it had forced him to endure the very helplessness he had so gleefully inflicted upon others. Back in Chicago, the ripple effects of the trial decimated the toxic culture of the 2nd District. The grand jury indictments triggered by Whitaker's seized cell phone were ruthless. Sergeant Dennis Rohr and Officer Kevin O'Shea were both convicted of federal conspiracy charges and sentenced to years in prison. Captain O'Reilly, facing a massive internal affairs audit and public disgrace for his failure to supervise, was forced into an immediate, unceremonious early retirement, losing a significant portion of his benefits. Riley Beck, the rookie who had found his conscience just in time to save himself from a cell, resigned from the Chicago Police Department the day after the verdict. Haunted by the systemic corruption he had witnessed, he packed his belongings and moved out of state, taking a job in forestry management, desperate to leave the badge and the blue wall of silence far behind him. And on a crisp Monday morning in the heart of the Dirksen Federal Building, the Honorable Judge Kendrick Hale stepped out of his chambers. He adjusted his black robes, picked up his wooden gavel, and walked into courtroom 14. The bailiff called the room to order, and everyone rose. Hale took his seat at the bench, his eyes sharp, his mind clear, and his resolve completely unbroken. He looked out over the gallery, ready to do the necessary, unyielding work of holding the line between justice and the dark, ensuring that the light of the law reached into every corner of the city. The chilling reality of United States versus Vance Whitaker is that justice often balances on the razor's edge of pure luck. Had Kendrick Hale been pulled over blocks further down 55th Street, away from the unblinking eye of a bank security camera, the blue wall of silence would have inevitably triumphed. A fabricated report would have become historical fact, and a corrupt officer would have remained on the streets. This story is a stark reflection of real-world civil rights battles, highlighting the terrifying vulnerability of citizens when unchecked authority operates in the dark. It underscores the vital necessity of objective accountability. Body cameras, external audits, and courageous whistleblowers. Ultimately, true justice was only served when the system was forced to hold a mirror up to its own darkness, proving that a badge is a responsibility to the public, not a shield against the law. Thank you for listening to the whole story, and if you want to see more true crime stories and the consequences of karma like this, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Stay safe, stay smart, and see you in the next video.